Hello, sir, from India. Why do Americans speak words like I'm thinkin' or dancin' instead of thinking and dancing? Okay, so this is a case of how all languages change, or most languages change naturally over time, and then that leaking into spelling. So you have the written language and the spoken language. And usually what happens is the spoken language changes much faster than the written language. And I'm sure you can imagine the reason for that, right? Because when people are talking, they're trying new things out. They say little things, and also there are generational differences. Kids don't want to sound like their parents, so they'll do things differently. There's this process of continual change and variations, and also different types of language used in different settings. You might speak one way to your colleagues and a different way at home, right? You might use a lot more slang at home. You might use a lot more idioms at home that you might not use in the workplace, right? So for these reasons, the spoken language, not just English, changes very, very fast relative to the written language, which changes slower because we learn it in schools and it's kind of frozen in books, right? And so we're less likely to say, well, let me just do it differently, right? It still changes over time, but it's much slower. And that's the reason why, for example, the word night is pronounced night, because it didn't used to be pronounced that way, but now it is, because it was kind of hard to say, and it changed over time over the last, 500-600 years. And the spelling is still, after all this time, Knight, which, if you think about it, is kind of a crazy spelling. If we spelled it the way it sounds, we would just write Nite, and that would be enough, right? So there's that. And when it comes to the question specifically, thinkin' instead of thinking, think about what's harder to say. Is it easier to say thinkin' or thinking? So when I say thinkin', my mouth is more relaxed, and my it doesn't need to go as wide, and there's a thing I don't have to do at the back of my mouth, like that sound at the back. When I say thinking at the back of my mouth, I have to do what's called a glottal stop, like that. And so it sounds like that, right? But if I say thinkin', it's just an N sound, and I'm kind of relaxed. So it's the result of a kind of relaxed way to say thinking that naturally happens because it's easier. People tend to, when they're speaking, do things that are easier sometimes. But this also has cultural associations. So when people hear thinking, looking, doing, they might think of countryside person. The first person I think of when I hear thinking, looking, doing is some guy who's maybe a farmer wearing a big straw hat, says, I'm thinking about going down there and doing that. That's the first thing I think of. So now I could say to myself, I could do that, but since I don't want other people to, when they hear me speak, think, surely he's a farmer. Nothing wrong with farmers. Farmers are great. But I don't want the association of people thinking that I have kind of less educated speech, right? So, as I'm an English teacher, I have to have good speech, so I don't do it. But a lot of people do it, and we also make decisions on that basis. How we express ourselves based on how people think about different language patterns. And it's the same thing for little idioms or sounds or thinking words, like I guess, like, if we wanted to, we could go like do that if you want. I sound uncertain and unsure of myself if I talk like that, so I don't, right? So to answer the question, the reason that this has changed is because it's easier. But the reason that not everyone does it is because it also comes with social connotations that many people won't want to be connected with. And if you're wondering if it has become part of spelling, the answer is yes, but only for country music, right? So certain let's say an album, a music album, would have, instead of crying for my girl, it'll be crying and with an N and then an apostrophe at the end to mark that there's a missing letter, missing a G, right? Apostrophe. So CRYIN apostrophe for my girl. That's the title of the song. So it's spelled that way with the intention of saying, yes, this is a country song. We are proudly spelling it this way because we know it's not the correct spelling, but we believe that this represents us, this culture, the people who listen to country music. Again, nothing against those people, for sure. That's the idea. And that's, I think, fascinating, right? You also see it in books. If there's a character has a certain dialect, a lot of dialogue in books is written phonetically. So you'll see things written as the author wants you to hear them rather than how it's actually spelled. So people going down there to do that might be spelled in a crazy way to make you hear the dialect rather than actually just read it out, written perfectly and spelled perfectly. That's a common thing that I believe was started by Mark Twain, although maybe it was someone else, and I don't know that. But he was one of the early pioneers in the English language to write dialogue phonetically. If you read books like Huckleberry Finn in English, you'll see how, for example, Jim speaks. It's really clearly to get you to hear how he sounds. So, Kishore, hopefully that answers your question. I know it's a long answer, but it's a really interesting question.